And I'm a creativity consultant and founder of my own design consultancy firm, Deduce Designs. And today I'll be sort of chatting with you all a little bit about my own experience in information sciences, specifically my background as a data scientist as well as a user experience researcher and designer. I'll be answering some of your questions about the fields and talking a little bit about my own experience and sort of where I see the fields going. So just as some background, I want to greet all of the information science students in Professor Ammari's graduate and undergraduate classes at Rutgers. It's because of your questions that we're doing these talks in the first place. My plan here is to record one continuous talk that I'll then break up into smaller sections for those of you who want to skip around. And specifically, I'll be going into kind of my background and how I got into the information sciences. I'll be giving specific career advice for those information science students who are interested in data science and user experience design. And then kind of more lastly, I'll be giving some general life advice about the discipline of information sciences, and how to kind of think about your early career and ways to get started. And hopefully some other nuggets of wisdom sort of scattered along the way. And hopefully there's something in here that's helpful. If in any one of these videos I didn't specifically answer a question that you had, please feel free to respond in the comments. I'll be following these videos. I'm happy to offer any advice or perspective that I uniquely have. So on to the next question. Okay, so after that kind of specific career advice, I got some questions around what's the future of the information science field? Like where do I see it going? Why did I develop my consulting business? And yeah, I just want to use this as the opportunity to kind of talk big picture about the discipline of information sciences and how this plays out in the real world. And then, hopefully inspire you to move on in your careers. So to begin, I just want to thank all of you for following along so far. We've talked about my professional background and we talked about some career advice for sort of budding information professionals. In this section, I'll be discussing what I've witnessed in the field and what are my thoughts about this discipline in a sort of ongoing sense. Again, this is just my perspective. Take it with a grain of salt. But hopefully, in my experience, this will give you something to think about and to give you some potential direction for thinking about how you want to work in the world after school. So when I left off in my personal story, I had just graduated with my MSI degree and I was a real information science professional. And at that point, I'd worked for nonprofits, I'd worked for governmental organizations, I'd worked for several corporate organizations. I'd had a range of different roles. I was a data grunt, an analyst, a user researcher, interaction designer. So I'd been learning what I was good at and what types of work I enjoyed. Those weren't necessarily the same thing. And seeing where I excelled, right? Like having those different roles, working in those different organizations, I just got to press on the edges and be like, oh, okay, I like this, not so much that, right? I was learning about myself. I couldn't do that overnight, and I couldn't have gotten that right after school. I needed to actually go through the experience of having those different roles in order to pick that all up. But as I was going through this career journey, if you will, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something fundamental that wasn't working for me. I couldn't ignore the fact that the rat race, the corporate employment model that we have in the United States was very literally causing me physical, emotional, and mental harm. And I know that sounds hyperbolic, but when I was working at one of the best jobs in my career, I had such bad and chronic back pain that at the ripe old age of 32, I was experiencing difficulty walking. And I was in the prime of my life and I wasn't able to enjoy it because I was in so much pain, and no matter what doctors I went to. And I wasn't the only one. These types of complaints were so commonplace in the corporate America that I worked in that I just never thought to question what's the root cause of the discomfort. It was just, there was this veil that was put over my eyes, which was like, well, this is what being a grown-up means. Think about all these sitcoms you watch and memes. It's like, well, being a grown-up just sucks. There was some part of me that just really didn't believe that. But I feel like every other cue I was getting from my day-to-day work experience was, this is normal, just live with it. But it came to a point where I couldn't ignore it anymore. And I was becoming aware of this kind of like underlying and structural illness that I see within corporate America, which is this system of an unrelenting drive for profits at all costs. And it seems obvious or maybe a joke to say this, but that drive to overinflate performance and to create the illusion of improvement really felt insane in some of the places that I worked at. Busy work, the replicating and re-replicating of work, the actual, and I'm not kidding, literal legal ways to manipulate performance numbers in order to impress stockholders. I just couldn't take it. And this isn't only my perspective. Brene Brown did a 2-part series on armored versus daring leadership within the organizations that she studied on her Unlocking Us podcast. I'll link in the description below. And I think those podcasts are really valuable for anyone who's intending to go into the corporate world, because she really articulates and dissects the signs of shame-based cultures within the organizations, the like 500 plus organizations that they've looked at. If you're noticing those or seeing those in the organizations you're working in, or more importantly, if you glean them from your interview process, those are important things to pay attention to, right? This isn't normal, or this isn't this isn't a healthy way to work. It's worth a listen, especially if you're intending to go to bright, sparkly corporate America. I don't want to dissuade anyone from doing that, right? Everyone's life situations are different. And I know plenty of people that work in corporate America and are perfectly fine with it. I just, in the areas of the organizations that I happen to be in, there were things that I witnessed that really disturbed me. I was ready to try to find something different. So I left my corporate jobs and I started my own consulting company. And when I set off on that journey, I set myself the task, which was to redesign what work means to me. So at this point, I'm a designer by habit and by training. And my first inclination when I face a problem is to think about how I would redesign the system. I'm not kidding you. This is literally how my brain works now. So when I left my corporate job, I sort of set off on these crazy adventures the last couple of years in order to identify and define what a new type of work could look like for me. In that discovery process, I've begun to lay out what are the principles that are guiding my work decisions these days. So these are my principles. I'm not saying that they're anyone else's, but for me, this is how I now guide my decisions for what types of work I want to do and what clients I want to work for and what types of things I'm interested in. In redesigning work, I'm thinking a lot more about how the systems as they exist because of the measures of success that we've laid out. Profit is king, right? I think has led to a kind of manipulation and corruption of American capitalism. I want to be guided by different values. I want to work in a way that honors my own body. I want to be open to a career path that's incredibly flexible. This said from the person that's jumped through 5 different industries. But those are, by defining them for myself, these can be more active decisions. They are brought more into my awareness, and I'm making active choices about them, as opposed to what it felt like at other points in my life where I was climbing the corporate ladder because I'd been told that that's what I should do and what I would want to do. These last couple principles at the bottom I want to highlight. Thinking about discernment, non-judgment, and serenity, what that means to me. I would highly recommend to anyone at any stage of their life or their career to begin the process of learning meditation. I didn't talk about this in other parts of my talk, but being a student of meditation for the last number of years and doing it at various points in my life with different levels of commitment, right? I don't think meditation is one of those things where you have to be a hardcore meditator for 2 hours every day or anything. It can be just as simple as doing a 10-minute meditation using one of the many meditation apps out there, Calm, Mindspace, Insight Timer, just putting on a 10-minute meditation as you wake up in the morning. It has so profoundly changed my life that it's worth pointing out that learning to calm and focus my mind, especially in this world, this highly connected, highly information overload, bombarding world that we live in, we can live in high states of anxiety and stress, particularly in corporate environments that are driving for nonstop improvement, growth, evolution. That can be a very stressful undertaking, but learning to calm and still yourself, even in moments of high stress, I think has been one of the greatest tools that was not something I learned in school, but it's now a guiding principle for me to try to choose jobs that I know that I can maintain that level of serenity because I'm not choosing to actively enter into high stress, high stakes situations because I know better. And I want to point out, right? Notice that I didn't add like do what you love or some other nonsense that we use to shame ourselves into working a certain way. Do you, do what works for you, and then work towards the life you want to lead, however that may look. But do it with your eyes wide open. That's all I'm saying. If you can make a career out of doing something you love, awesome, bravo. That's definitely something worth striving for, but that shouldn't be the only goal. And really importantly, that isn't always available to all of us all the time. I think the pandemic is a perfect example of that. You could have been on in many ways, I felt like I was on a path that was leading directly to what I wanted. And this current state of the world was like, nope, we've got different plans for you. And because I meditate, and because I work on learning to accept uncertain circumstances, it's been a process of being like, okay, I'm maybe not on the path I thought I wanted to be on, but what about this path is also providing a different type of opportunity? And am I open and available to finding it? We go in and out of it. We go in and out of like being super successful and then sometimes not feeling so successful. One of the greatest lessons of my life is to learn how to decouple my path and what I'm choosing to do from other people's expectations of what I should be doing with my life, or even that little voice in the back of my head that's telling me, well, you should be this or you shouldn't. Attachment to that idealized expectation of what your life should be definitely causes a lot of unnecessary suffering. Whereas relaxing into the fact that there's like an ebb and flow constantly in your life, and sometimes things are like really kicking it and sometimes they're not and they're contracting, like it's just going to be a constant state of flux. And that's actually where all the growth happens. That's where all the adventure happens. That's where all the opportunities to surprise yourself happens. That's where confidence gets built and trust in yourself and your abilities gets built. So it's not a bad thing, but there's no need to place unnecessary pressure on yourself. Taking things one step at a time and working towards what you look to achieve can be very rewarding. In light of all of that, is it worth chucking everything out and becoming an entrepreneur? Again, it depends. When I chose to start my own business, I was at a moment in my career where making that choice was not easy, but it felt less risky than the alternative, which was staying in a job that I was finding very stressful. That's not the case for everyone all the time. However, remember, thinking about the advice I gave you earlier about your school projects and assignments is like, could you use them as the opportunity to practice stretching your limits in a relatively risk-free environment? Taking risks like starting your own business might feel hard if you haven't worked out that muscle of taking that kind of risk. If you haven't developed the confidence in your skills or in your ability to kind of recover. I'd been working, I'd had a lot of opportunities at different points in my career, both in school and then in the work, where I was constantly pressing what I was capable of. So when I got to the point of making the decision to start my own business, yes, it was fundamentally scary. It's still terrifying, but it felt like a risk I was prepared to handle because I'd practiced. I'd practiced taking other risks before. So this, while risky, felt like something, it was a manageable risk. It was a knowable risk to me, it felt like. So you can train yourself with practice, with self-introspection, meditation, to become more and more uncomfortable with the uncertainty of life, because let's be honest, like the only constant is change. And this can open up some really amazing doors. So is entrepreneurship for everyone? Maybe not. But are the skills that entrepreneurs have to develop of confidence, trust, self-reliance, risk-taking with awareness, right? Those are skills everyone can develop if they're willing to practice them in lots of different areas of their life. And so that brings us to today. We are in April 2021. We have now been in this global COVID-19 pandemic for over a year now, and we're still deep in it. And the world is so very, very different from when I graduated and even when I left corporate America a couple of years ago. The global economy is still in a standstill because of the quarantines, and all this isolation has really got all of us questioning what matters, what's important. And I think the machine that had been chugging along for so long, because it's fully stopped, it's the first time that I think a lot of us on a global scale have started considering, was the way I was living my life previously, now we have an opportunity to see an alternative. The ways that we treat healthcare in the United States is being questioned. Systemic racial bias and injustice in the United States is being questioned. At a global scale, we're seeing the consequences of decreased pollution and air travel and what kind of effects that's having on the environment. Like, we're being given a glimpse, if we're willing to see it, of alternatives. And I'm not saying that we should all live in isolation for the rest of time. I'm saying we're in this flux. We're in a flux, a really big flux. And we've seen misinformation spread. We've seen implicit biases put on display. We've seen information privacy violated. We as information professionals, we are in the profession of providing intelligible information to people. In a weird way, we're kind of at the forefront of a lot of shaping people's understanding of the world. And we have this crazy global backdrop of like pandemics, wars, famine, and climate change. So in the backdrop of all that, the students, these cohorts that are coming into the world, and we kind of as information professionals more collectively have to start asking ourselves, so what are we going to do about it? You know, are we, when this pandemic is over, are we going to go back to doing things the way they've always been done, expecting that things will be different? Or are we going to use this weird hibernation we're in to imagine and envision alternatives that don't yet exist? But we can start setting out to create them. The only way things will change or improve or get better or evolve is if individuals like us take even small steps in a direction towards a different outcome. And personally, I think it just starts with saying like, hey, I'm one of the people that wants the world to look different than it did a year ago. I feel like that's the journey of redefining work for me, has been about saying like, I think there needs to be an alternative. I think an alternative exists, but I don't see enough people saying that it does exist. How do you want to participate in the world going forward? Where do you see your interests lie? Or where do you feel like you can provide support to create the change that, this world kind of really desperately needs right now? My answer to this question was, in starting this creativity consulting business, was my way of saying like, let's do something different. I personally would love to see more entrepreneurs out there in the world creating alternatives to the big tech companies that exist. I would love to see more people creating businesses that they loved, providing products and services that they felt driven to provide. I'd love to see alternatives to corporate America. I would love, and I'm saying this as like a classically trained economist here. I would love to see alternatives to American capitalism that didn't drive us towards only seeking profits. I would love for social impact measurement to be one of our key performance indicators. I'm personally trying to dedicate my life to fostering the creativity of others because I want to create a world where more and more people feel inspired to try something new, if for no other reason than because they can. Not because they have to be a success. You know, what does success even mean anyway? And not even to make lots of money, like just to try, right? Just to try to create something that is meaningful to them. I think the more people that bring products and services like that and into the world will materially shift our society when we are making more choices to do things that we love and we find valuable, irrespective of what success results from it, right? Can the success be measured instead in terms of our sense of satisfaction and happiness, as opposed to, 7-figure salaries and mansions and things that we already know are very wasteful and are frankly hurting the home that we live in. So ultimately, what do I see is coming for information professionals in this field and, for you guys specifically, is current career structures as we define them in the United States might not be working for everybody. As you're going forward in the process of finding and making your own way in this discipline, I'd invite you to be skeptical and to put a healthy dose of realism into your career search. Keep in mind that this very strained global context that we're in, of this pandemic, provides an opportunity for some really radical change for how we think about the way the world works. And if you want to, you could be a part of that change. These opportunities are only just beginning to come into our awareness and our consciousness, but we have the opportunity to define them if we're willing to speak up about what we see them as. Joining in voices with others to imagine a different world, it can only happen if we as individuals step in and participate in the conversation. To those ends, we need to sort of identify what fears are limiting us from taking steps to courageous action. But that part of that can be challenging the assumptions that we've made about how the world is supposed to work, or what work is supposed to look like, or what success should or shouldn't be. In understanding these kind of limiting beliefs that we've all been beholden to for so long, we get to redefine the boundaries. As you become a professional, as you step out into the world, you get to define for yourself what works for you and what doesn't. You get to be a part of that conversation as opposed to just purely assuming, like I did myself, that, well, this is what being a grown-up is. This is what grown-up life looks like. It doesn't have to be that. Part of the reason why I'm excited to have this conversation with you is because doing big things, whatever they are, making change in the world, coming to grips with this crazy global situation we're in, can only be done in chorus, in conversation with one another. Consider this as my big ask to you as you're setting off into your careers, is to really examine the type of change you want to see and how you'd like to personally participate, what you feel willing and able to contribute. We can do this if we're working together. And part of working together means identifying and knowing what you'd like to say and how you'd like to be a part of that conversation. So, go out there, be curious, make as many mistakes as possible as you can during your degree. You're doing great. It's going to be awesome. I wish you all the best. And again, please feel free to drop any comments or questions additionally below. I would be happy to continue this conversation with all of you. And I look forward to seeing and hearing how your careers continue to develop. Thank you so much for following me along this video so far. If you're interested in hearing more about my professional background, you can just refer to part 1 of the series. If you're interested in learning more about my career advice, specifically to information science students, data science, user experience design students, just head over to part 2. Look forward to seeing you there. And with that, I just want to say a big, giant thank you to all the students in Professor Ammari's classes for your questions. They were wonderful and insightful, and a great opportunity for me to look back and think on my own experiences and reflect on some of the lessons I've learned. Please feel free to drop me any comments, questions you have. I'd love to hear from you, especially as you go on into your careers. I look forward to hearing more about your adventures. Okay, bye.